Welcome to Soups On, a podcast with the Loveland City School District Superintendent, all about what's going on in and around the public schools in Loveland, Ohio.
Welcome back to Soups On. It's Joe Wessels from Loveland Local News. It's been a while, but we're glad to start doing these again here. We are sitting in Dr. Amy Crouse's office here in the Loveland City School District Board of Education offices here on Lebanon Road in lovely Loveland, Ohio. And sitting across from me, as always, is Dr. Amy Crouse. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're here early. So lots to talk about, but kind of to catch everybody up in case you've been living in a cave, the Loveland cave, I guess, here. Last time we talked, we were talking about a levy in November of 2019. The big shocking news is that it lost. And it lost kind of badly, 78 to 22%. That was by anybody who watches politics, that's a pretty big,
absolutely
pretty big loss.
Absolutely.
That's a resounding message from the community.
That's a stop and regroup.
Stop and regroup, and this is not what we wanted. Mm-hmm. The Board of Education, I guess in December, voted to go ahead and put this on the March primary ballot. That's going to be March 17, which is a Tuesday in March here coming up, not too far off. So that's what we're talking about, the next levy here, which is a lot lower than the 16.78, I think, that we had on the November ballot. This one's going to be a 6.95 levy, which is for operating only. Operating only.
No facilities as part of this plan.
Right. So that was before, as we were talking about needing a new school, which was proposed to be at the Grailville property, and we had to talk about that a little bit as well too. So, boy, this is like taking a bite of this big old apple here. Where do we start on all this stuff? Any thoughts on what happened in November? Like, where is the school board, is the school district? You know, I'm sure you're not happy about it, but what did you learn from that experience?
So, you know, clearly the message was we have an affordability issue. There were
you said affordability.
Okay. Certainly,
people can't afford that much on their taxes.
Right.
Okay,
in not just affordability from I don't have that in my monthly budget, yes, but just affordability in general. Like we can't continue, the way schools are funded through property tax. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out a different way to think about the way we're doing business. Affordability from maybe this one is just too much money out of my budget, and even if that's not the case, over time, this is too much money out of my budget. So really stop and pause and think about, how do we do business differently if the tax base, the lack of commercial property in Loveland is significantly different than our neighbors, then we can't do business like our neighbors. And how can we utilize the strengths and the passions and the expertise of those in our community to think about things differently, to do something different? If we're funded differently, how can we be innovative in that way? Looking to your neighbors and saying, well, they do it, or they do it, or they do it, clearly can't be the way we solve the way we do that here, because our situation is different. We can complain about school funding and try to get that changed and continue to fight that battle. But the reality is we have needs now. We have operating needs now. We do have facility needs. We're going to have to address that in a different way. But the number one thing that I learned, I would say, is that regardless of your complaint about that November ballot, affordability was part of that. So we have to come together to figure out, how can we support schools in an affordable way? I did not hear anyone during that time say, we do not like schools, we do not value our public schools, we don't value the work we're doing. It's affordability issue.
Which is interesting because, I have two stepsons who are in the Loveland School District, and a daughter who will be going to kindergarten here in the fall. And we're very excited. We're very happy with our teachers here in Loveland. We're fortunate that this is what we have as a public school system here. And I think that is generally in the community. People are very proud of the school system, and that translates into some actual real dollars, because property values are higher because of the school district here. And I think I said this on a previous podcast, or maybe I said this to you before we started recording, but this is kind of if we want to play with this with the big boys and be one of the top school districts in Cincinnati, which we are now considered by these, and I know how these magazine polls kind of work. Sure. It's sort of, they sit around the editorial board table and kind of go, I hear Loveland's pretty good. And maybe they'll look it up and go, oh yeah, look, or base it off of state testing scores or start report, all that kind of stuff. But there's some subjectivity and some objectivity that go into this. And that's how they formulate it. Loveland happens to be one of those places that people go, oh, I want my kid to go there. And that means that our property values are higher. So like my house here, like in Coleraine where I grew up, would be probably $30,000, $40,000 less expensive. And I can find a house that's almost identical to what we have here in Coleraine. So what do we do when you fail a levy? Because you're trying to maintain that school district to be the school district that is this desirable place. And then balance that with people's financial concern. I mean, how do you?
Sure.
I mean, that's like $1 million question, I guess. But how do you?
Sure, and to flip around to try and create that story and to try and educate people about that story before the March levy is a heavy lift, and we know that. But to wait until November. We simply can't enter into next fall with financial uncertainty. We have to know what our budgets. We have to be able to count on funding. So we just felt like it was in the best interest to try and get that heavy lift done by March and try and get that story out. But the truth of it is in 2014, when the last operating levy was passed for 5.6 mils, that was intended to improve access to programming for science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. The edges speak around STEM education.
That was 2014.
STEAM,
you said
2014.
5.6.
5.6
mils. Okay.
And the message when we asked for that money at the time was to improve access, improve programming, improve student outcomes. Invest in technology, access and infrastructure. So for the last 5 years, that's what we've been doing is this investment phase, adding 40 new programs at the high school, increasing access to gifted programming, creating pathways for students' graduation, adding advanced placement courses, adding reading supports, adding counseling, clubs and resources for mental health, school safety, all of those things that are important to the community. That was this investment phase. So what we have, the pivot, this affordability idea, that slap in the face, and I don't mean it negatively, that, okay, what did you learn? A wake-up call. It's a great way to put it. Is this affordability issue. Say, okay, let's pause. So we have a short-term and a long-term plan to try to address that. So from a short-term plan, we're calling this sustain. In order to sustain the growth and the investment that the community has made for all these programs, for these great these student outcomes that we're getting, sustain that with a 6.95 ask in March. We also made $2.7 million worth of cuts and slowed our roll. Stop the ads from the planning forward. Let's utilize the resources that we've already gotten, and the board is committed to not letting our growth rate exceed 3%. When in the past our growth has been 4% and 4+%. So to reduce those plans. So that's the short term need. Sustain what we've got and continue to allow us to use a plan. With the investment money, we made a plan, we had a budget, we made great strides, we were able to execute that plan. Now trust us to execute a different plan around optimization. So we'll get the sustain money, support us in March, and then we'll spend the next months continuing forward on optimization. How do we utilize the skills and the resources and the talents of our community in a planning commission and a board commission to support?
Is that going to be a new commission that's going to? Yep. How do people get to be a part of that?
So we're going to work out the details at the next board meeting, and they'll have an application process, and we'll get that online. We want to have a.
So it's going to be like a subcommittee of the school board or something, or?
Well, I mean, it can't really be a subcommittee of the school board, but can be
legally it can't be that.
Right, consulting to the school board. So several neighboring school districts have had this in place for decades. Madeira started it over 70 years ago. They have a planning commission.
Specifically for the school district, not for the city, but for the school district.
Sycamore has modeled that. When I did some research on it in the area, when you see about high functioning planning commissions, it all does seem to go back to this Madeira model. So I met with some leadership from Madeira to try to replicate some of that great work here and engaging our community in that way. And so really,
my mother is a proud graduate of within the last 70 years too, of the Madeira School District.
Yeah, and they, it's just a way to really, that's the other wake up call is we have really smart people who have different ideas that push us and challenge us to think about doing work differently within the public school system. So, that's our long-term plan, is to have a commission to work on a compensation committee internally with our employees and their contracts, to obviously put optimization and utilizing the great resources that we have already in the school district into our school improvement plan. Less about growth, more about optimization. So we have a short-term and a long-term plan to make that pivot to continue to deliver these great things that we have for our students in a space of affordability.
Mm-hmm. So that was part of the wake-up call for after that time November. There. Then you had a group of residents get together as well too, right after the defeat as well too.
The ad hoc committee that we put together.
Yeah, and where did those people come from, and what was their kind of? So you could kind of summarize the.
So we engaged them to find out their thoughts about what the next steps were. Is a March levy feasible? Mm-hmm. And listened to their input, talked them through. It wasn't so much about consensus building or a vote. It was really about listening to people talk about there's no right answer. And
that was with the session with Jeff Steck. Is that right?
No, Jeff Steck, we hired Jeff to facilitate from an outside, just a listening session, and having somebody from the outside just help. It was so them and us, and trying to bring we're a community,
right.
And so we felt like we needed an outside facilitator just to try to get us in the same room together.
Jeff's
so we could grow.
I don't know if you know, I've known Jeff for 20 years. He's not a great friend, but a good friendly acquaintance. He's perfect for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I was surprised when I saw his name. I'm like surprised but not surprised. I saw his name. I went, oh, of course, Jeff was the guy.
He'd done a ton of great work in Lakota.
Yeah, he does with Lakota.
And so it was recommended from Lakota that just he can help find that space so that we can try to get Loveland back to a we.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And we haven't really, I did send him an email saying, hey, I heard you're out here, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about it. I actually saw him a couple of weeks ago. Just said hi to him. He was with somebody else. But it's cool that you guys had that, because I know that methodology, and I think it's a really nice way to bring people together to kind of listen to each other. Mm-hmm. But yeah, enough about that. Anyway, so let's talk about the nuts and bolts a little bit here. Maybe we should do that. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back after that and kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what this all means here, because I think there's a lot of we could go on and on about some of the different things that are out there, and I just want to kind of ask you a little bit about that. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Soups On podcast with Dr. Amy Crouse. I'm Joe Wessels from Loveland Local News, and we'll be back right after this quick break.
If you have a question about the school district, have something to share, or want to be a guest on the show, please contact Soups On's producer at lovelandlocalnews.com or call 513-899-NEWS. That's 513-899-NEWS or 6397.
Okay, welcome back to Soups On. Joe Wessels, I'm the editor, publisher, chief bottle washer at the illustrious Loveland Local News, with the superintendent here of, and this is Soups On, I should say. This is with the superintendent of the Loveland City Schools, Dr. Amy Crouse. And before the break, I said I wanted to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of this, and maybe get into some of the kind of the questions that are out there that people say they're not getting answers for. So I'm kind of curious about why that is, and maybe kind of what your answer is to some of that. You mentioned the 5.6 levy from, was it 2014?
2014 was the last operating levy.
So there's a really interesting part of this that I'm not hearing anybody talk about, which is really critical when you need to and kind of understand how levies work. So what is the I'll ask you the question, then I'll explain it. What's the effective millage rate? Do you know right now for that?
I don't know right off the top.
But it's
of
not
my
5.6.
head. No. So legislation was put into place back
1976.
I was going to say in the 70s.
I've done my research here a little bit.
Thank you.
House Bill 920?
920.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
And so essentially what that does is holds the income raised by property taxes flat.
Yep.
Over the course of its life.
Right.
So when we talk about permanent or a continuing levy, I'll make the math simple from an educator standpoint rather than from a financial standpoint. If this levy raises $1 million, we will continue to only raise $1 million even as your property taxes go up.
Correct.
So from that effective millage, you voted in 5.6, but as your property values increase, that millage is going to go down. Your lift from that will be reduced.
And the term that they use to describe that is called the effective millage. Is what the voters passed 5.96, or say the levy had passed back in November of 2019, the 16.78 would immediately been reduced with the tax bill starting the next year because of this House Bill 920, which I think is a fair thing. I mean, maybe somebody who's at a school might not think it's fair. Because it's kind of like you ask for this much, but you also then figure that into the amount that you ask for because you know that that's going to happen.
Sure. But that's why school districts have to be on this cycle of continually asking. So other utilities or other government agencies don't have that effect. Yep. So, since in that same time frame from the 5.6, property values for property owners in residential property owners in the school district have gone up over 10%.
Right.
So
what is interesting to me, I saw this. I was looking on Nextdoor just to see what people's questions were because it seems to be the place where a lot of people are talking about this. I mean, there's other places as well, but locally here in Loveland, Nextdoor seems to be the hotbed of it. And I saw it described a couple times exactly the opposite way. That it was not the reduction factor, it was like the increase factor, so that they keep raising the amounts of the school district always gets the same amount. And it actually, and I feel like this is important as a journalist, I need to explain this, it goes exactly the opposite way. They don't raise your taxes to keep getting the same amount of money. They actually reduce your taxes so they collect the same amount of money. It's the reduction factor. Now, if you live in Hamilton County, which is, I think the majority of people who are in the Loveland School District come from...
About half and half.
Is it about half and half? Okay.
I don't know geographically, but at least enrollment is slightly higher.
And I've looked...
It's about half and half, depending
on I can't remember off the top of my head if the Claremont County auditor puts this on there, but I know Dusty Rhodes, who's the Hamilton County auditor, does put it on his website, which is, it says exactly what the reduction factor is. Talked to Dusty. I said, how's this calculated? And he said to me, and I love Dusty, he's been a great source of mine for many, many years. He says, I have no idea. We get that from the state. And his exact quotes to me, and again, I have to say, Dusty, love you if you hear this. He said, our computers aren't big enough to figure out what that reduction factor is. So we actually get it from the Ohio Department of Taxation. I think that's where he said it gets from. It
makes sense.
At the state level. Mm-hmm. And they come down and they say, this is the reduction factor for people in Loveland School District who are paying this thing. So effectively, over time, this levy collects less money. It doesn't increase with the inflation.
Well, the levy collects the same amount of money.
Same amount of money.
Less from you.
Less from you. Mm-hmm. It collects the same amount of money. So it doesn't go up with the assessment and the property value. It actually remains the same. But school districts still experience inflation and everything else. Right. So eventually that money doesn't go to zero. That $1 million in 2014 isn't $1 million in 2020 or 1975 or 1976 when this house built.
Still just $1 million.
Still just $1 million, and that's what you get. So expenses for school districts go up. They have to build new buildings, and I'm not saying this to defend the ask or whatever. I'm just saying this as this is the facts of the matter.
Sure, and because we're a people-heavy business, it is naturally inflationary. Right. So
can't do schools without people.
Sure, and so when we talked earlier. This notion of reducing our growth to a 3% versus a 4% is attempting to address some of that. Mm-hmm. But the notion of live within your means, don't ask for any money is we're naturally inflationary because we have people,
right?
And we want to have great people, and
That's
people
part
get
of being
paid,
a good school district,
and part of inflation and just inflationary of we can argue whether you think teachers get paid too much or not too much, and I mean, I think we're all going to know where I stand on. I think teachers are the most, incredibly valuable to community. So that being said, cost of living doesn't go up with our income, and we're naturally inflationary. So we can look for ways to control the rate at which we increase our spend, but we're always going to be.
It's not going to go down.
We're always going to be in that.
Well, they're kind of pulling apart. They're kind of
I'm
like
using my hands, and I know my hands don't show in a podcast.
Right, and I'm doing the same thing. But explain it's kind of like the
they're in contradiction with one another.
Right. So one is always reducing, and the other one's always increasing. So you're always going to need more money.
Right, and that's the cycle of operating funds.
And that's not Loveland special to Loveland. No. That's Cincinnati Public. No. That's Little Miami. That's Kings. That's Cuyahoga's schools, or I don't know what they're called. Maybe they're called Cuyahoga.
Right. It's true. And again, the wake up call in November is that's fine, but still we have to figure out a way to manage through that from a sustainability standpoint. So there's a truth to it. Yep. I mean, it is how it is. That doesn't mean we can't work to improve that. Speed
absolutely.
At which that happens. And that's our commitment to work on that. But it's never going to be, we've got it figured out, we're done, coming back and asking.
I think you'd be foolish if you didn't. And then
it just doesn't,
if you didn't look at it, and I guess that was the message that I heard from the community was, maybe you need to do a little bit better job of that. And you hear that message, and you're trying to work on that as well, too. So good. I just feel like we had to explain how this stuff, it is confusing, even to somebody like Dusty, who's been the auditor for going on 30 years now in Hamilton County, who is a kind-hearted, smart guy, loves his job, knows his job. He said to me, I don't really know how they figured that out. And I said to him at the time, I said, that's surprising to me. He goes, oh, it's so complicated. This is a complicated thing. Yep. And I don't want to belittle people that are explaining it and getting it wrong, because it is complicated.
Absolutely.
Even to a guy who, this is more of a hobby these days than a profession, but I love trying to figure this stuff out. It's confusing to me. So
one of the things that I think is a misconception about a school district is there's a superintendent and a treasurer. The treasurer does not work for me. The treasurer and I are partners. Both the treasurer and I are employees of the board.
The board can only hire you and fire you. No one else can. You cannot hire and fire Kevin Hawley.
Correct.
Did I say his last name?
Correct. You did.
Okay. Great.
So point being, you hire a CFO. You hire somebody who is the financial expert who's an expert in learning and understanding those concepts. And then you have your superintendent as the instructional leader and managing that side of the house. And we have to work in partnership with one another. But I do think there's a misconception about, the treasurer working for the superintendent. We work in conjunction.
And there's a reason why.
Absolutely. It's a checks and balances.
It's a check and balance, right? Because you guys could get in cahoots and then run off to the Cayman Islands together or something.
Well,
right?
I mean, it's a checks and balances in that, he has a budget that he files with the board, with the state. I can't overspend that budget.
Yeah.
I can't. The budget's made. It doesn't exist. So,
but if you start acting, say, well, maybe we could, take some money and go on a little extra. There's a real cool education conference in Barcelona. Maybe we need to go to, or he can kind of be a check and balance on you a little bit and say.
I mean, let's say we wanted to do that.
And I'm not saying I don't want to start any rumors.
The reality would be there's no extra money to do it.
Right.
The response would be, then what are you not going to do? Because we value here, and I'm not suggesting there isn't a great conference in Barcelona, perhaps there is, but what we value here is how we expend money in our classrooms towards our kids. 72% of our budget goes to student instruction, and only 56 other school districts in the state can boast that level of focus on the kids. So he would say, okay, if you can go to Barcelona and learn those things, but what's not going to happen? And what's not going to happen would be something for kids, and that's not our mission. That's not how we make decisions here in this district.
And I wouldn't say that. I mean, that's not in this school district. It's happened before. In the vast world of even Ohio, superintendents have made poor financial choices, and
sure.
And I can't give any specific examples right now, but you hear of them every so often. Somebody loses their mission, they don't keep their eye on the prize, whatever, or maybe they're just not good people, and they do things that they, there is a cool education conference coming up in, Tokyo.
Sure.
And so they decide to go there and bring the whole.
There's definitely, with any,
you can tell I need a vacation, right?
Thing with any ambitious leader, you always run into, that flux of are they just an ambitious leader trying to pad their resume to move on to the next thing, or are they here to do mission for this work? And I know there's two types of people. For me, I'm about kids. What I want to do is leave a school district better than what I found it, to make outcomes better for students. I love to be with teachers. I love to be with kids. I love to be with parents. I love to do those things because I like to make schools great for people and get out of teachers' ways, let these things happen. I know people don't go into public education to make $1 million. I certainly am not in public education to be famous. I want to do a good job for our school district and make things better for kids. But I do understand that there's a perception of ambitious leaders who wish to do other things. That's just not who we are here. Right.
So when the levy failed, there were certain decisions that had to be made. And one of those involved the Grailville property. It's an interesting problem, I think, because we don't have, Loveland is growing. There's not a lot of places to build schools. If we ever need one in the future, there's an argument that we have property we could build on the schools right now. So we did a contract with Grailville, gave them $100,000 of earnest money, essentially. What happened to that money then?
So as earnest money, it was to hold that contract, to hold that for a year, to ensure that we could have a building plan for that. Truly, from the very beginning, understanding that leaders in the school district have been looking for property for decades of how do we ensure the future of the facilities plan and the future of the district, knowing that property didn't come up very often. The intention was, the reason it wasn't part of the levy is the intention was to purchase that anyway, and to then, if we had to pivot and rethink the building plan, we would do that in parts, but we would still need that property to implement that facilities plan.
How much were we going to buy it for? I forget.
$7.7 million.
Okay.
It was 70. Now you're catching me off guard for fast math, but it was essentially 110 acres for $70,000 an acre. So initially, we wanted to make sure it was buildable. We did an environmental study and all of those things to be good stewards of the plan to make sure that we had property moving forward. So again, earlier we talked about that wake up call of affordability really became an issue of, would we ever be able to afford to utilize that property? And overwhelmingly, the answer was, it doesn't appear to be. So again, that how can we get creative about making facilities that our kids need in an affordable way? And unfortunately, that meant canceling that contract, and at the cost of the loss of that earnest money. You make a business decision. You make the business decision with the best information you have at the time, and then sometimes the climate changes, and sometimes information changes.
And before we get too specific here, we're running out of time for this here, but I want to save time for this, and this would be a good lead into some of the other things. Some people have said on social media that you're being kind of loose and fast with the facts, and that you're not answering public records requests, that they're asking for information. I didn't know if I heard anything specific. There was questions about why was there an increase in spending to Forward Edge, the technology?
That answer is now fully addressed on our website.
Oh, is it really? Okay.
Yes.
And what's the website?
Lovelandschools.org.
Okay.
And
where do they go to find out?
There's a banner at the top that says March 2020. So it would have facts, FAQs about the levy, and about issues related to the levy. So
can you address that just a little bit now, or do you prefer people to go read it on the website?
I can address it in general because it's quite complicated or quite convoluted. Okay. So essentially it was about that investment in technology. So initially the costs with the vendors were about infrastructure, and then it was about providing access to students, and now it's about support of that infrastructure, support of that access. And you choose to either do that internally or you choose to do that with a vendor. But one of the investments from that 2014 levy was making sure our kids had access to technology. We were, from a technology standpoint, we were way behind our peers in neighboring districts. Also, a complaint I hear is we don't have to keep up with the Joneses, but there is an element of making sure that our kids are prepared.
No matter where you are.
No matter where you are.
Yeah. Okay. So what is this to the, are you, I imagine, is people learn about the open records law and open meetings law that, anybody can file a public records request. I have done that. I don't believe I've done it to the school district, but I have, cause I get to talk to you in this podcast. And I believe your answers. You don't feel like you're trying to lie to me or anything like that. And believe me, that is one of the things that drives me batty, as a journalist. If somebody's lied to me, then I go right to the public records request. Or they're being cagey, you're not giving me the full answer, that sort of thing. And I filed quite a few of them with the Loveland, city of Loveland, but because of that exact reason. So are you getting inundated with these right now? Is that because people are saying, we're not getting the information, we're asking for it, we're not getting it? Is it because you don't want to tell them? Is it because you're getting so many of them? And the other thing to public records requests, I know you can't, if you have to read the law, there's something called the Yellow Book, which I know, it's Ohio Attorney General's office. It talks about open meetings and open records. Public records requests have to be something you have here. They can't ask you to generate reports. You can, if you want to, if you feel like you want to. So sometimes it's not just something you have. Like, I want to know, what's the brand of butter you use in the kitchens or whatever, like, well, we don't have a report for that. We could, so then you have to ask for the invoice from the food vendor or something. And then you see butter, it's, Land O'Lakes or whatever. And then you go, oh, they use Land O'Lakes. Is that what's going on? Why do people, and that's a long question, but
Well, so the treasurer of a school district is the steward of public records. So all public records requests go through the treasurer's office.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
That's to ensure fairness. It's to ensure that.
Is that every school district, or is that just the policy? Oh, that's everyone. Yes. Okay. So if I send a public records request to you forward it on to the treasurer.
Yes.
And that's, anybody can ask for a public record, even if they don't live in Loveland or the Loveland City School District. And do you charge for public records requests here?
We would charge if it required. Most things are electronic now. Yeah. But if we had to make a photocopy of something,
then you would charge.
Then we would charge you whatever that. 10 cents a copy. I don't know what our charge is.
Yeah, the charge has to be, by Ohio state law, it has to be what you pay for it. You can't say, we pay 10 cents to, modern office machines for the copier. And then we can't say 50 cents a copy or $5 a copy because it has to be exactly
what. It might actually be law how much we can charge. I don't know. It's not much, but it's written down. It's either part of our policy or we're told that, but you're correct. It's not a money generating. So the law says within a reasonable time, which is, that's.
Yeah, it can broadly defined.
Sure. And the reality is that while I might charge you 10 cents a copy, there's a cost to labor. They're labor intensive. So we have gotten a large number of public records requests. Sometimes they're worded broadly, overly broad and ambiguous would be the term, because it's not. There's not a record. You said you spoke to this earlier. There's not a record. A record doesn't exist. Yeah,
you don't keep track. You don't track butter purchases in all the schools.
Right. So I said, if you wanted to know what our budget was for food service, there's a record. But if you wanted to know what the budget was for butter purchases, there's no record for that. Right. You'd have to go through
the invoices yourself
and figure out butter, because there's no record responsive to that request. At the beginning.
And that's not being cagey. That's any government you'd ask.
For sure. Yep. For sure. Because it's labor intensive to produce that data.
Right. And you could do that. I mean, there might be, if you really getting the butter information out there is, I don't know, you could
certainly,
but I would just say, my experience, most governments will say, we don't have a record responsive to butter purchases.
Because again, we also have to run a school district. So that's, we have a job and a job.
Correct.
We wish to be communicative, but we also have to run a school district.
Right.
So, and, with the employees we have, so you balance some of those. Additionally, many records that are requested contain information that is not
releasable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right.
So it has to be redacted.
And those laws have been changing frequently in the past 10 years.
So we have to consult legal. And then, if something has to be redacted and it's a large file, then many people need to look at it to make sure we got all of the right information or the appropriate information redacted. So things take time. Kevin has tried to answer things in order, which makes something smaller down the line. I mean, he's tried to weigh order versus that's an easy one to do, and he tries to crank through several of those a week. But we are very inundated. I will say that sometimes I hear from people. I am not on social media, but sometimes I hear from people.
Oh, come on, why not? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. No.
Sometimes I hear from people. Well, we've asked for that. We, air quote, we've asked for that, and we've not gotten it. And there isn't there isn't a pending public records request on that. So sometimes I wonder, people pose questions out into social media and say, I want to know this, and no one answers. Well, social media is not a venue in which we're going to answer. When we do hear frequently asked questions that are genuinely frequent, we do work to update our website. From an expedience standpoint, I know people want that information right away. Yeah. The challenge when a school district publishes information is every detail of accuracy, and and it takes time to make sure that we're fully accurate. So we run that that race between hurry up and tell people and you lied. No, it wasn't. It was worded wrong, or it was misleading in the tone. It just takes us. It's a challenging thing to explain in writing. It's much easier to talk to people, but people want answers in writing, and I understand that. It just takes time to do that so that tone is correct and there's a history to it. It's sometimes, do you know about House Bill 920 before I answer that question?
Yeah.
It becomes somewhat overwhelming.
And we got to wrap up here, but I'll tell you, I'll throw out a little trick of the trade, or the journalist trade too. If for people that are listening, if you want to do public records requests, and I'm sure you're just like, oh great, you're going to ask for more, because it's part of the part of the deal.
People's right.
A great way, and I've not done this, and I might just ask Mr. Hawley if I could get it. It's the record retention schedule. I find that is a great way. You go and ask for the record retention schedule, and you know what has on the record retention schedule? Not only how long they have to keep records, it has a list of every record the school district keeps, or the city, or the township, or the county, or whatever. So if you're looking for something specific and you're getting a lot of I don't know's back, or we don't have that, or no responsive record, get that record retention schedule. If you don't know what kind of records the government keeps, then you'll know exactly what they keep, and you can ask for them.
Well, and
it'll probably go a lot faster. It'll probably help his job a little bit, and then it would probably get you, the person who's asking, the information that they want faster.
And Mr. Hawley tries to address that often in his responses. He might say, we don't organize records by topic. Those records are organized by date. Trying to, if you reword that request, there is a record to that.
I think he has a duty by law to say that to you. You can't just say it doesn't exist. You have to say, or I think the person may have a right to ask, and then you're supposed to say, help them find that record. The idea is not to play, the shell game, or hide the ball.
But also there is criticism that, you knew what I meant. Well, he also has a legal right to not guess what you meant. Yeah. Right. Because to not interpret that.
Right.
And sometimes it is clear what you meant. And he does try to, legally respond to you, but he can't just say, well, gosh, I know what you mean, Joe. I'll get that for you. Because he can't interpret that. He has to, that he's legally required not to interpret that at the same time. So he grapples with that too. It is just a function of being a public agency.
Yep. Well, with that, let's wrap up. And this is a little longer than I expected, but we'll do it again, hopefully soon, and we can talk some more about some of these other questions here, because there are quite a few. And one day maybe we'll get to talk about something besides the levy, because that was not the intention of this when we first talked about this like a year and a half ago or something. Which is just
that is
levy.
the hot topic. So.
But it is the hot topic, and people have questions, and I think it's important to get the information out there. So, thank you again, Dr. Crouse, for your time. Thanks for you listening, you folks out there, I should say. Thanks for listening to Soups On. I'm Joe Wessels, again, the editor of Loveland Local News. Check us out at lovelandlocalnews.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter. We are also on Instagram, and I think that's good enough for now, but also subscribe to this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can actually now even just say, Alexa, play Soups On podcast from Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or TuneIn, and it'll play it. So, and on your Apple HomePod and your Google Assistant, all that kind of stuff. We're everywhere, so you can listen to us everywhere anytime. So, again, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time on Soups On. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to Soups On with the Loveland, Ohio City School District Superintendent. If you have a question about the school district, have something to share, or want to be a guest on the show, please contact Soups On's producer at lovelandlocalnews.com or call 513-899-NEWS. That's 513-899-NEWS or 6397. Please visit lovelandlocalnews.com and click on podcasts to get past episodes, learn more about the show, see photos of our guests, find out about our other shows, and more. Special thanks to our musical contributors mentioned during the show. Soups On is a production of High Priority Partners, LLC, and is distributed through Loveland Local News. Copyright 2020, all rights reserved. Please rate and subscribe to our show on iTunes. Your ratings and reviews really do help others find the show. If iTunes isn't your thing, you can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, anywhere you get podcasts. I'm Joanne Lichtenstein. You can find me and my voiceover services at joevoices.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Soups On.